Hey everybody, this is Jim and I'm going to help people install a 11448 Curt Hitch in an A4, but not a standard A4, an A4 Allroad. So in theory, this is supposed to fit. Looked underneath the fascia and looks like things are at least in the same general dimension. We'll find out. One of the key things that's different about the A4 Allroad though is you'll notice there's a couple. I've already taken this little, looks like an air baffle item that mounts underneath the spare tire location. I think it's just basically to clean up the air coming off the back of the car. But there's a couple of bolts that are going to get in the way of the hitch mounting, so I'm going to have to take those off. Those are the two other screws there that mount that. I've reattached them, but these two are going to get in the way, and I'm basically going to Dremel them off so that the plate underneath the hitch can mount to the drain plate underneath the spare tire. The other item that's maybe a little bit different than the standard A4 is the hands-free sensor, which mounts underneath the car like this. It's towards the back end of the fascia, which basically closest to the rear tire stowage area. So basically it just kind of clips out. It's easy to pull out. You want to set that off to the side though, because the trimming is going to happen in this area right here, and that basically mounts along this front area here. So obviously when you're trimming it, you don't want to trim the wire obviously. So that just basically clips out though, and just you can set it to the side while you're doing the trimming and then install it later after you've put the hitch in. The next step is I've marked the fascia with the dimensions that are in the instructions. So that's sort of a bottom view, and I've got a rotary Dremel tool which I'll be using for cutting. I use this to cut the metal studs, but this is both for plastic and metal cutting tool. So we'll see how this goes. There's a little extra dimension in there where the clip is for the hatch sensor. It's going to take a little more cutting. It's going to be interesting to see how it goes, but I'm about to do this. Another little wrinkle with the A4 wagon is, I think on the A4, the spare tire tools are in this area. What's actually here, and there's a bolt here that kind of removes with a knurled ring. This kind of comes off, and then there's two 10mm nuts that are down here. I've actually removed them already, but what is in here actually is a speaker, so subwoofer of sorts, and basically can remove that. I think I'm going to take the cable off, but can get out of the way. And then the drain plugs should be these two areas here, which are covered with this fabric. And then these should just remain. These are the screws for holding the speaker in place. So that's what's next. Okay, I've removed the fabric on top of these drain plugs here. Basically those should just push out. I say to cut them from the bottom, and I might do that, but they just are set in place and sealed from the bottom, and then you put a silicone seal on this side once you mount the plates. These are the seals underneath, and basically I've trimmed them and then they just pop out. So basically a real simple operation to remove the drain plugs. There's two of them. There's a third one here in the front that you leave in place, and then these again are the two mounting holes for that other face, that other air dam type, which is not on an A4, standard A4. So I had to remove those so that the plate of the hitch will sit flush on this surface. Otherwise those screws would be in the way. And then we'll go to the rest of it. And this is the top view with the drain plugs removed. And what will happen is these will basically mount in and secure those down. The key thing though is sealing it with some silicone on the underneath part, so that's going to be the decision I have to make if I want to remove more of this material here to have that plate, this bracket basically sit flush on the metal and have the silicone squeezed in between basically to seal it off. So I have to decide on that in a little bit. I went ahead and removed this fabric material kind of in the shape of the device. That basically will sit flush metal on metal. I think that's a little different than the standard A4. I don't think it has this in here. Basically this will give a nice seal once it's all mounted together on the bottom to not let any exhaust in, which is kind of a key thing obviously. So that's what I decided to do, and also just to give it a good purchase, metal on metal, for the mounting in general. Okay, I was pretty liberal with the silicone. It takes a little while for it to set, so I want to get this mounted before it sets, obviously, so you can get everything aligned. But having an old Z that used to have an exhaust leak that I could never ever solve, I chose to be a little more liberal with the silicone here in this car. So that's my advice anyway. Okay, some advice for you on installing the brackets over the bumper brace. I found that I had to leave the bolt in here, but not the bolt in over there to fit it up over, because I didn't have enough dimension to fit that far bolt through. So I had to get the bracket up on top of the bumper brace and then work the bolt through from the top, which was kind of tricky. Took a little while to figure out the angle to get that in there. There's a little space up on top where you can push the bolt all the way up and then pull it back down through the hole in the bracket. And I'm talking about the top bracket now, not this part here, but the part that goes over the bumper brace. This side is a little trickier because there's a sensor on this side that gets in the way of your hand. The side over here is a little bit easier to work that in because there's nothing over there that gets in the way of your hand of working this far bolt in from the top. So basically, I found once I got it mounted, because I did this just by myself, it was easier to do these back bolts in first, so that I could kind of support the whole brace with these with this back portion. And then I also found once I got it mounted, I have not tightened this up yet, but you really want to pull this bracket. You want to pull the device forward, because in this area you'll notice before you've tightened it up, you've got some play. And what you want to do is make sure you have these brackets mounted flush over the holes, the drain plugs. Otherwise there'll be an escape leak. So basically you just pull this forward. You can see there's some play in here before you get tightened to get those centered. And then take a general look at how it looks. And that looks like going to be a pretty clean installation for that bracket, for the actual tube, I should say. And make sure it's all centered and looking nice before you get underneath it to tighten everything up. So again, you want to have those centered, and I found the best way to do that was to basically, once you got it loose or loosely installed, is to come back here and just give it a little tug forward and just make sure those are nice and centered. Okay, got it installed. Looks like a pretty clean install, actually. From the back. One thing I would suggest for the fascia trimming, the instructions say 5.5 inches by 2 inches You don't have to go as wide as 5 inches, 5.5 inches, if you'll notice. I would say probably more like 3.5 inches total. So an inch less on each side, basically. I'm not sure why they go as wide there. I think they're allowing for this tongue, these brake bars to fit through, but you don't really need to fit it through that hole. And I'd go a little deeper than 2 inches, maybe 2.25 or so, because I ended up pulling this back as far as I could, and I was resting, and I had to kind of do some extra trimming, which I wasn't too happy with. But that's all underneath the car, and from the back, looks really clean. So now to put everything back together, the other thing I did is I went a little more liberal with the silicone. I really want that sealed up well, so that'll dry up nice and clear and clean. Looks a little messy right now, but should have a nice good seal around those. I really don't want any exhaust coming through on the back of the car. So that's about it. Actually, instructions are pretty good. The only thing I would say is that bracket mounting on top of the rear bumper is a little trickier to get in than what they indicate. And then maybe trimming the fascia a little differently, not quite so wide, and maybe a little deeper to let that poke through. And then again, on the A4 Allroad, there is this extra air dam piece which mounts underneath the spare hitch, kind of in this area. And there's 2 bolts basically that I had to trim that were in the middle and just remove this. Not really sure that I could ever imagine putting that back on. I think basically what it's doing is it's just cleaning up the air coming underneath the car a little bit through the back. So, but with hitch mounted and everything, it changes all the aerodynamics anyway. And I don't really see any way I could mount that back. So that's one key difference from the A4. But as far as the dimensions are concerned, it all mounted up nice. I was a little worried that the dimensions were slightly different. For the pan, for the spare tire, and the top brackets mounting, but actually it is all the same dimension. So the 11448 does mount to an Allroad and looks fairly clean.